Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong, not because you were loud, not because you broke any rules, but simply because of how you looked? Have you ever been met with silence so sharp it cut deeper than words? Have you ever been seated only to be asked to leave before even opening a menu? This is the story of a woman who wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She just wanted to have lunch. But the moment she stepped into that upscale restaurant, something unspoken filled the air. The kind of judgment you can't see, but you can feel. No one asked her name. No one offered a menu. They just saw her skin her clothes and assumed she didn't belong. Minutes later, that same room would fall silent again, not from judgment, but from disbelief, because a Bentley was about to pull up outside, and the man stepping out would change everything. But let's not rush to that part. Because what happened before that moment, the stares, the words, the silence, is what this story is really about. It's not just a story of a woman and her billionaire husband. It's a story of dignity, of perception, of what it means to see someone before judging them. And if you stay with me, you'll witness a moment that cracked open a polished facade and reminded everyone in that room why respect should never come with a price tag. Let's begin. It started with a glance. Not the kind that says welcome, but the kind that says, "What are you doing here?" Amara stepped into the restaurant quietly. She wasn't wearing anything extravagant, just a soft beige trench coat, a pressed blouse, and simple flats. Elegant in her own way, understated, but not the kind of elegance this place was used to. The hostess barely looked up. Just a flicker of the eyes, a pause, and then that tight-lipped smile. The kind that says more than words ever could. You've seen it before. It's the smile people give when they've already decided who you are. Amara's hands clutched her purse a little tighter. She asked for a table for one. The hostess blinked as if confused, then asked, "Are you meeting someone here?" There was no warmth in her voice, no curiosity, just surprise wrapped in condescension. That's the thing about places like this. They claim to serve everyone, but some people get the velvet rope and others get the polite rejection. Let's be clear, this wasn't about dress codes. Amara's outfit was neat, clean, perfectly appropriate. But respect in places like this doesn't always follow fabric. Sometimes it follows assumptions. And the assumption that day was simple. She doesn't look like the kind of woman who belongs here. It's a subtle kind of exclusion. Not the loud, obvious kind, but the whispered sort that hides behind polite words and tight smiles. And it often begins with something as simple as a glance. Think about that. How many times do we decide who someone is just by the way they walk in a room? We don't ask their name. We don't ask their story. We just look and judge. Amara had been looked at like that before. She knew the signs, but today she chose not to walk away because sometimes it's not about the food. It's about the right to be seen. And that moment, small, cold, and quiet, was the spark that would set everything else in motion. Because just outside at that very minute, a Bentley was turning the corner. But we're not there yet. Before we get to the shock and silence, you need to see what came next when silence gave way to something worse than exclusion, humiliation. There's something about luxury spaces that no one really talks about, a set of unspoken rules written not on paper, but in the way people look at you when you step through the door. It's not about money, not entirely. It's about signals. The watch on your wrist, the brand of your handbag, the cut of your suit, the way you speak, how confidently you ask for a table, and yes, your skin. These are the silent passwords of high-end places. And if you don't speak their language, they often assume you don't belong. Amara hadn't broken any rules that day. She was polite, soft-spoken, dressed modestly. But to the eyes trained by decades of conditioning, she didn't read like the typical customer. It wasn't just one person. It was the quiet murmur from the couple behind her. The way the waiter adjusted his tone from sharp and formal to overly cheerful, like he wasn't sure what mask to wear. These are the kinds of things that rarely make it into Yelp reviews, but shape the entire experience. We'd like to believe that upscale restaurants, hotels, and boutiques welcome everyone with equal grace. But the truth is, many of these places run on unwritten rules, Rules rooted in history class and yes, race. There's a name for it, coded bias. Where exclusion doesn't sound like slurs, but like I'm sorry, we're fully booked today, even when empty tables surround you. Where service feels more like surveillance than hospitality. This isn't just Amara's story. It's happened to people like Oprah Winfrey, who was once denied service at a luxury store in Switzerland. The clerk assumed she couldn't afford the handbag behind the glass. Oprah, a billionaire. That's how deep these assumptions run. And the irony, the people enforcing these silent rules often don't even realize they're doing it. It's habit, it's training, it's culture passed down without question. But here's the truth. Belonging shouldn't be a performance. You shouldn't have to look the part to be treated with dignity. Amara didn't want special treatment. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just wanted a quiet lunch like anyone else. But in spaces like these, dignity often has a dress code, and it's one you're never told about until you break it. Still, she stayed. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. But something in her shifted, not in anger, but in clarity. Because when you've been through enough of these moments, you stop wondering what you did wrong and start seeing the pattern for what it is. And just as that realization settled in, something else arrived, not an apology, not a menu, but a request. A request that would turn quiet judgment into very public shame. It didn't come as a shout. There was no scene, no angry voice, no dramatic pointing to the door. It came in a whisper, a polite smile, and a sentence that, on the surface, sounded almost harmless. Ma'am, this restaurant has a strict reservation policy. Are you sure you're in the right place? That was it, just 16 words. But in that moment, Amara felt them land like a slap across the face. She looked around at the half-empty tables, the couples just now being seated, the young man in a hoodie, who'd walked in minutes after her and been shown to a table without hesitation. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't questioned anything yet. She just stood there, still holding her purse as the hostess continued. We could recommend something more casual nearby if you'd prefer. Something more casual. Somewhere more appropriate. It wasn't what they said. It was what they meant. And that's how humiliation often works. It doesn't always yell. Sometimes it smiles as it turns you away. It reminds you that you're not just unseen, you're unwelcome. The worst part, there were witnesses. People saw what happened. They heard the words. They watched her shift her weight from one foot to the other, swallowing hard, trying to decide whether to fight or flee. But no one said anything. Because when it comes to quiet discrimination, everyone has learned how to politely look away. Amara didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply asked, "Are you telling me I can't dine here?" The hostess hesitated, then offered a rehearsed reply. "We have to maintain a certain environment. I'm sure you understand. A certain environment." It's strange how those words stick, not because they're loud, but because they're loaded. They carry the weight of every door that's ever been shut for reasons no one says aloud. And here's the thing, it doesn't matter how wealthy, how educated, how accomplished someone is. Humiliation doesn't check resumes. It stings just the same. For Amara, that moment wasn't new, but it didn't hurt any less. And as she turned to leave, heart pounding and dignity cracking, something unexpected happened. From the corner of the room, a waiter who'd been quietly watching stepped forward and whispered, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, that wasn't right." It wasn't loud. It didn't change the outcome. But it mattered. Because even in humiliation, a single human moment can shine through the fog. Still, the damage had been done. The message had been sent. But what no one in that restaurant knew, what none of them could have imagined, was that in less than 5 minutes, everything they thought they knew about Amara would be turned upside down. Because just outside, a Bentley was slowing to a stop. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't come from not knowing what to say, but from choosing not to say it. As Amara stood there quietly humiliated, a dozen eyes followed her every move. Forks paused midair. Conversations softened to a hush. And still, no one spoke. Not the older couple near the window who had smiled at her when she walked in. Not the mother with two young kids who glanced up, then looked quickly away. Not even the waiter who had earlier refilled water with courteous nods but now avoided her altogether. They all saw what happened. They all heard enough to understand. But they said nothing. Because speaking up in spaces like this, elegant, expensive, polished, often feels like breaking the rules. Not the written ones, the invisible ones. The rules that say don't get involved, it's not your business. Keep things comfortable. Comfortable for whom? What Amara experienced wasn't unique. Moments like these play out every day in boardrooms, boutiques, airlines, hotels, where someone is treated differently and everyone else just watches. Psychologists call it the bystander effect. The more people witness an injustice, the less likely any one person is to act. We wait. We hesitate. We tell ourselves someone else will step in, but often no one does. And in that stillness, the silence becomes its own kind of violence. Not physical, but emotional. Spiritual. Because when you're standing alone being quietly pushed out, every second of silence feels like agreement. It tells you, yes, we saw what they did, and we're okay with it. Amara didn't expect a hero. She didn't need a crowd to rally. But a simple, that's not right, would have changed the whole atmosphere. Instead, she walked out alone. Not just excluded, but abandoned by the very room that saw everything. And yet sometimes, even in silence, change is quietly approaching. Because while the restaurant chose comfort over courage, something bold was arriving outside. The sound of polished tires, the soft purr of an engine that didn't belong to anyone in that dining room, and a presence that didn't need permission to be respected. The Bentley was here, and so was the man who drove it. At first, no one noticed. Not the hostess still smoothing her skirt behind the podium. Not the diners already settling back into safe conversation. And not the manager who had just walked by without so much as a glance toward the door Amara had exited moments before. But outside, just past the marble entryway, a soft sound broke the quiet. Not loud, not flashy, just the low, unmistakable hum of a machine built to glide, not to announce. A Bentley, jet black, polished to mirror finish. Every line on its body curved like confidence on wheels. It pulled to the curb slowly, like it knew it didn't have to hurry, like it had arrived exactly when it was supposed to. Amara didn't turn her head right away. She was still adjusting her coat, still breathing through that moment, the one we all know where you try to gather yourself before anyone sees the cracks. And then the door opened. He stepped out, tall, composed, not rushed or rattled, no designer logos, no need for introductions. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Just one glance between them, the kind of look that holds 1,000 quiet reassurances, and Amara finally exhaled. He walked over, gently placed his hand at the small of her back, and asked simply, "Are you ready to go?" or "Would you like to eat here?" It was not a threat, not a challenge. It was a question of choice, of agency. Because in that moment, he wasn't just her husband. He was the embodiment of something the restaurant had denied her power. But not the kind that roars, the kind that whispers, the kind that makes people sit up without being asked. A valet came running. The doorman straightened his posture. Even the hostess, who minutes ago had questioned Amara's presence, suddenly found her voice stammering something about a table becoming miraculously available. Too late, because what had just arrived wasn't just a luxury car, it was perspective. The kind that makes people rethink the judgments they made just 5 minutes earlier. This is the part people remember, the image that goes viral, the karma moment. But that's not why it matters. It matters because it revealed something deeper: how fast people shift when wealth walks in, even if they ignored the woman standing alone before it. And while the Bentley may have pulled up at the perfect time, the real change came from what happened next. Not from who arrived, but how he chose to respond. Because true power doesn't just turn heads, it changes the room. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't flash a business card. He didn't mention his net worth or what he did for a living. He simply stood there. And somehow the entire energy of the restaurant shifted. The man behind the wheel was Jonathan, Amara's husband, a private investor, entrepreneur, and former professor of economics, the kind of man who believed real power never needed to be announced. He wore a charcoal gray coat, simple shoes, no watch. And yet when he walked through the doors, every head in the room turned. Not because of what he wore, but because of how he carried himself. It was presence, the quiet kind, the kind you can't fake. He didn't speak to impress. He didn't scold anyone. He just looked around slowly, carefully, as if observing, not accusing. And then with calm clarity, he asked the hostess, "Is there a problem with my wife dining here?" Just one sentence. No anger, no theatrics. But something in his tone measured unwavering made the room hold its breath. The hostess fumbled for words. The manager appeared out of nowhere, suddenly smiling, suddenly gracious. We were just about to seat her, he said. It was a lie and they both knew it. But Jonathan didn't argue. He didn't shame them. He just turned to Amar and said, I believe there's a better place up the street. Quiet, respectful. Let's go there instead. And with that, they left. He didn't need the table. He didn't want revenge. What they wanted was dignity. And maybe that's what shook the room most of all. Because we're used to seeing anger. We expect outburst confrontations drama. But sometimes the most disarming response is poise. That's the kind of presence Jonathan had. It's the kind that changes minds without raising a hand. The kind that reminds people that real power doesn't need to perform. You see, a lot of people confuse power with noise, but those who have it rarely need to prove it. Jonathan wasn't there to make a statement, but by choosing restraint, by refusing to validate their assumptions, he made one anyway. And it rippled through every person in that dining room. One man, one moment, one decision, and suddenly people began to see what they hadn't seen before. Not just a woman in a coat, but a story, a soul, a human being with every right to belong. And while that moment left many stunned, what came next would leave them completely speechless. Because some apologies don't come with words. They come with silence, and it's often too little too late. They always apologize. Eventually. Sometimes it takes a viral video. Sometimes it's a complaint or a manager's nudge, or the quiet realization that the person they dismissed was someone the world might actually listen to. But by the time the apology comes, it rarely feels like it's meant for you. It feels like it's meant to cover themselves. As Amar and Jonathan turned to leave, the hostess, flushed nervous, suddenly called out, "Wait, I think we can find you a table now." And just like that, the entire tone shifted. From cold and dismissive to warm and overly accommodating. The same woman who had suggested something more casual was now offering champagne. The same manager who hadn't appeared during the incident was now holding the door, smiling too hard. But Amara didn't smile back, because something in her had settled. She had seen it before, that scramble to repair an image, not a relationship. That sudden friendliness that only shows up after the money does. It wasn't about the table. It never was. It was about being seen before the Bentley arrived, about being heard before they knew who she was married to. Because the apology wasn't really for Amara. It was for the room, for the perception, for the witnesses. It was PR, polished, reactive, too little, too late. The truth is, real apologies don't wait for status. They don't arrive only when a man in a tailored coat shows up. They come the moment someone notices harm and chooses to name it. This was damage control. It was a script. And that's what hurt the most. Not the words that had been said earlier, but the ones now being spoken without meaning behind them. It happens every day. At hotels, at counters, at check-ins, at gates. When someone is treated like less until the system realizes they're somebody. But here's the thing, everyone is somebody. With or without the Bentley. With or without the name. With or without the pedigree. Jonathan glanced once at the manager, then back at Amara. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Together they walked away. And as the doors closed behind them, they left more than a table empty. They left behind a moment the staff wouldn't soon forget, not because it made them look bad, but because it made them feel something they couldn't explain. And that's what true dignity does. It doesn't shout, it leaves quietly, but it leaves a silence so loud you can't ignore it. But this story isn't just about a missed apology. It's about a much deeper truth, one that touches every person who's ever felt the need to prove they belong. And in the next chapter of this story, we'll talk about why so many people of color, especially women, feel like they have to carry resumes in their smiles just to be treated with basic respect. Amara never walked into that restaurant to prove anything. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't looking for recognition. She simply wanted a peaceful lunch, the kind anyone should be able to enjoy, without explanation, without defense, without fear of being turned away. But too often, people like her don't get to just be. Too often, Black women, especially in elite or formal spaces, feel the pressure to show up with armor. Not the kind you wear, but the kind you build over time. Polished speech, flawless appearance, perfect posture, a calm tone in the face of offense, because they know every glance is a test, every pause in service is a judgment, every question a quiet challenge. Are you really supposed to be here? It's exhausting. And while the Bentley didn't need Jonathan's quiet power or their financial status to validate her presence, it did change how they saw her. And that is the painful part, that sometimes people won't see your humanity until they see your value, not your values. Your value as in status, wealth, reputation, the things that shouldn't be prerequisites for respect, but often are. It's the same reason Dr. Mae Jemison, the first black woman to travel to space, was once mistaken for a tech assistant at a speaking event she was headlining. Or why Serena Williams, a global icon, has had her parenting, her fashion, even her body questioned in spaces where she should have been celebrated. Because for many, success doesn't erase bias, it just interrupts it. That's the truth Amara knew too well. She didn't need to prove anything to herself. She already knew her worth. But sometimes showing them the Bentley wasn't about validation, it was about revelation. A mirror held up to their assumptions. A reminder that maybe the woman they dismissed was someone worth listening to all along. Still, that's not the world we should accept. Because no one should have to carry their resume in their walk or their net worth in their handbag just to be treated with decency. Respect shouldn't be something you earn after proving your value. It should be the starting point. And that's the deeper lesson Amara carried with her as they walked away from the restaurant. She hadn't won a battle. She'd exposed a pattern. And as we move into the next part of this story, we'll widen the lens even more. Because what happened in that restaurant wasn't just about two people in a Bentley. It was about a system, a history, and the quiet ways bias still shapes who we choose to respect and who we silently turn away. This story isn't just about a restaurant. It's not even about Amara or Jonathan or a Bentley pulling up to a curb. It's about us, about how we see each other, about the quiet decisions we make often without realizing that tell someone you're not what we expected, or worse, you're not enough. Because what happened that day wasn't a rare event. It was a reflection of something deeper, something many of us carry in our thinking, our habits, our systems, implicit bias. Not the loud, obvious kind of racism we've come to recognize, but the quiet, coded kind that hides in plain sight. It shows up in hiring decisions, in who gets invited to the meeting, in who gets followed around a store or asked, "Can I help you?" But in that tone we all know too well. It's the assumption that professional looks a certain way, that wealthy sounds a certain way, that belonging has a face, a dress code, and an accent we've unconsciously learned to trust. And it doesn't just hurt individuals. It weakens communities. It tells young people, no matter how smart you are, how kind, how capable, you still might be seen as less until you prove otherwise. That's a burden no one should have to carry. We've all seen it play out. The black student mistaken for staff at orientation, the Latina executive assumed to be someone's assistant, the Asian dad asked if he's the Uber driver when picking up his kids from school. Each moment might seem small, but over time they add up, and they teach people to shrink, to hold back, to doubt themselves in spaces they've already earned a right to be in. And maybe this story of one woman being turned away only to be welcomed once her husband's wealth was revealed shows us how fragile our version of respect really is. If it rises and falls with someone's clothes accent or car keys, then maybe it was never real to begin with. The good news, we can unlearn this. We can slow down the judgments. We can check ourselves in those micro moments when our gut reaction tells us something before our heart has time to listen. Because belonging isn't something we give to people. It's something we recognize in them if we're willing to look a little deeper. And that's where stories like Amara's matter most. Not to shame, but to wake us up, to make us ask harder questions of our society, yes, but also of ourselves. And as we near the end of this story, there's one more moment to share. Not dramatic, not loud, but meaningful. Because sometimes legacy doesn't come from the noise we make, but from the silence we leave behind when we walk away with our head held high. Not every story ends with applause. Sometimes the most powerful endings happen in silence when someone walks away not defeated, but whole. That's what Amara did. She didn't slam the door. She didn't ask for anyone to lose their job. She didn't demand compensation or post a video to shame the restaurant. She simply walked away with her dignity intact, her voice unshaken, and her worth unquestioned. And in doing so, she gave us something more lasting than a moment of outrage. She gave us a mirror. Because this wasn't just a story of rejection, it was a story of reflection. A chance for all of us to ask, how often do we judge without realizing it? How often do we mistake simplicity for insignificance? And how often do we wait until someone proves themselves before offering the basic kindness we owe one another? It's easy to say I'm not like that, but real change doesn't come from distancing ourselves from the problem. It comes from recognizing where it lives inside us. Maybe it's in the assumptions we make in elevators, in how we treat someone at a hotel desk, in whether we greet the janitor, the driver, the stranger at the next table. Because the truth is, you never know who someone is. And more importantly, you shouldn't have to know to treat them with care. That's the quiet lesson Amara left behind. That respect isn't earned through resumes or relationships or luxury cars. It's something we offer freely because everyone deserves it. And if we're paying attention, that's the part of her story we can carry with us. Into the next interaction, into the next judgment we're about to make, into the next opportunity to see someone fully before deciding who they are. Because in the end, the real legacy isn't the Bentley or the money or the moment that went viral. It's the pause we take before making up our minds about someone. It's the choice to lead with respect, not after credentials are revealed, but from the very first glance. And maybe if enough of us make that choice, the next Amara won't need to be seen to be believed. She'll be seen because she's there. And that would be the beginning of a better story. And maybe you're thinking, I've never turned anyone away like that. But the truth is, we all have moments, small ones, where we look without really seeing. So here's the question. Who do we overlook when we rush to judge? And what kind of world could we create if we pause long enough to look past the surface? Because respect shouldn't be reserved for the rich, the known, the well-dressed, or those with the right last name. It should be given freely, instinctively to anyone who walks through the door. If this story moved you, if it made you think a little differently, don't let it end here. Leave a comment. Have you ever felt like Amara or seen someone else go through something similar? Your story might be what helps someone else feel seen. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder. And don't forget to subscribe because we tell stories that matter. Stories that shift the way we see the world and each other. Because sometimes, the most powerful change starts with just one story. And that story might be yours next.